Hello, I'm Alan Sherlock. I am a soon-to-be graduate of Baker College. My degree is in a Bachelor's of Science, which I'm majoring in game software development. I've done a lot of research during my time in school, studying just about everything that there has to do with game development, with the hopes of one day being actually working in the industry. And of course, one of those fields involves the business side, which includes monetization of these games. I'm here today to discuss one possible solution for gambling in video games. More specifically, the idea that while loot boxes could have some good potential, some people, including myself, believe that they provide more harm than good by creating a gambling environment. So I mentioned loot boxes, but what exactly is a loot box? Well, a loot box is a virtual box, which some games use to reward players. And by that I mean the player would receive this box and they would open it and receive a predetermined number of items for use in that game. Random items, coins or potions, weapons, cosmetics, just a whole bunch of various things depending on the game that's choosing to use loot boxes. So a loot box microtransaction is a loot box, but players, however, pay real money to receive these loot boxes. One example is Blizzard Entertainment's first-person shooter Overwatch, where players can purchase anywhere from 2 to 50 loot boxes, ranging from $2 to $40. And each box contains costumes, emotes, graffiti sprays, and various other cosmetics for use within the game. There's actually a brief history for loot box microtransactions. The concept first began in a Chinese MMORPG, or massive multiplayer online role-playing game, called ZT Online, where players could purchase randomly awarded equipment for their characters in exchange for 1 Chinese yuan or 13 cents US dollars. And of course, over time, the idea of loot box microtransactions has grown. Titles such as Star Wars Battlefront 2 by Electronic Arts in 2017 decided to launch their game with loot box microtransactions containing not only cosmetic effects, but also playable characters, weapons, ships, and various other things that actually had gameplay value, which created an issue for players where in order to play the game that they purchased, they would have to buy these loot boxes to have a chance to get the content that they wanted to play. And that's kind of unfair. David Zendel, a member of the computer science division at York St. John University in the UK, actually published a paper where he discussed the results of a survey of just over 7,400 legit gamers, which unveiled that when people were asked how much money they spent on microtransactions compared to loot box microtransactions, evidence showed that non-problem gamblers spent an average of $1 to $10 on both, while problem gamblers, on the other hand, spent almost double when loot box microtransactions were involved. So in the past, developers have attempted to combat the loot box problem by changing the mechanics to be a reoccurring subscription service with rewards, or adding diminishing returns to loot boxes where after 5 loot boxes you would receive a guaranteed item instead of it being random in that box, or also introducing a virtual currency as an item inside of the loot boxes to allow players to purchase an option or an item of their choosing instead of receiving it from the loot box. The problem with these past solutions is, rather than fixing the problem, they've instead taken the opportunity to merge this solution with microtransaction loot boxes, which, rather than fixing a problem, actually made it larger, and they still continued to use loot boxes as a form of microtransaction on top of the other forms of now introduced microtransactions. So what's the next solution? Well, my solution, or my proposed solution, is to take 3 steps. First, request the removal of loot boxes from microtransactions in video games. Second is to have developers build out a storefront user interface for items to be on display. Kind of think of it almost like an Amazon, where players could browse through and find what they're looking for and purchase. And then the content that was previously in the loot boxes would be shifted to this storefront. And then the third step to the solution is to introduce one currency which players can purchase as a form of microtransaction. So now, instead of players purchasing loot boxes hoping for an item that they may or may not receive because it's random, players are now purchasing a currency and spending it on items in a store that they wish to receive. So let's take a look at my example using Blizzard's Overwatch. Currently, players purchase loot boxes, 2 to 50, ranging in $2 to $40. And then when they open up those loot boxes, they receive 4 random rewards, ranging from skins or graffiti sprays, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of potential rewards that players could receive. And implementing my solution, my proposed solution, players would instead purchase token packs ranging from 500 to 10,000 tokens for $2 to $40. And these tokens would then be taken to an in-game store and spent towards unlocking the cosmetics. So in this example, we have a player purchasing 2,500 tokens for $10, and then going to the store and buying a really cool Magni skin for their character for 1,000 tokens. And of course, you can price accordingly. So if Blizzard wanted to implement multiple tiers of cosmetics, they could price them accordingly, such as the blue cosmetics cost 75 tokens, the purples cost 250, and so on and so forth. Approaching microtransactions this way gives the player the gift of choice, and that is incredibly valuable, because a player is choosing to invest their money in a developer's game, so they shouldn't have to deal with the disappointment of not receiving something that they chose to purchase in the first place. It also opens the door for a more satisfied player base and allows you to build a relationship with the players and see return customers for their continued support. So the ethics behind my proposed solution, Rush Kidder published a fantastic book called How Good People Make Tough Choices, Resolving the Dilemmas of Ethical Living. And in his book, he discussed 3 principles to think about ethical decisions such as loot box microtransactions. He introduces the possibility of an ends-based principle, which is described as to do what is best for the greater number of people. So in our problem, there are 3 groups. And I'll explain the numbers behind this percentage-based here in a second, because the developers in the corner, they're definitely not 0%, but for this this visual, at least, it seems rather small. The players who are currently playing the game and potentially purchasing microtransactions is the first group. The developers who are working to create, maintain, and update the game. And then the investors, who's anyone financially supporting the development of the game from a stocks standpoint. So my solution finds the middle ground between all 3 games. Currently looking at the sample size of developers who work on Overwatch, the team average size is about 56 members. And there are just over 5 million players who actively play Overwatch, at least according to their latest investment discussion. And then just over 10 million investors currently invest in Blizzard. And as a side note on the investors, there are actually over 700 million shares in the company. 86% of those shares belong to institutional ownerships, which are groups of people roughly the size of the Overwatch team. So that brings the total of investors to just over 10 million people. So the greatest group would be the investors based off of this analysis. And they're the ones that are interested in how much money a company can generate, income being a direct result of microtransactions. So in a black and white world, one would simply leave my loot box microtransactions as they currently are, because it makes the investors happy, and the investors are the bigger group. However, with my proposed solution, there's another approach, which is compromise between all 3 parties: the players, the investors, and the developers. It provides the opportunity to bring in continued revenue in available microtransactions, which players can choose to purchase. The developers aren't really affected by this, because if they were doing loot box microtransactions, they were still creating the assets for those loot boxes. We're just shifting them from being inside of a loot box to being on a storefront. They're still creating the same number of assets. And the investors are still making money. And all groups benefit from this solution. So while my proposed solution doesn't eliminate gambling from video games, and it certainly doesn't address all of the gambling problems, I believe that this will at least lessen the greater threat, which is developers taking the opportunity to abuse the ability to lock really awesome rewards behind a repeatable form of monetization with the idea to make as much money as possible. It takes us back to the original idea of what video games were, which is buy the box and have fun. And that it's a at least a step in the right direction to building a new and better video game industry for developers, players, and investors to enjoy. So thank you so much for your time, and have a great day.